Gosh, dog it, boy. I'm just all over the place on this next record. Uh, let's go to it right now on my fancy playlist. Just some few amazing things about this record. March 18th, 1989. It's Animotion with Room to Move at number 22. First off, I just found out that record was co-produced by Steve Barry, the guy who produced hit records by the Grassroots in the late 60s, early 70s. I believe he either wrote or produced You Baby by the Turtles back in 1966, and Dizzy by Tommy Roe, produced Dizzy by Tommy Roe. Steve Barry, very distinguished producer back in the late 60s, 70s, and I guess going into the 80s as he co-produced this record. But let's get into this Animotion record. Well, I'm getting into this Animotion record, but I just had to mention Steve Perry. That just blew me away. Animotion underwent some personnel changes. Remember their first hit record, Obsession. Remember watching the video on Night Tracks to Obsession. It was back in the spring, late winter of 1985. Well, Animotion, they formed in 1983. Four of the members were formerly in a band called Red Zone. They were a retro science fiction band. They broke up, and four of the members they teamed up with They teamed up with a guitar player, and bear with me because my notes are chicken scratch. You can see there's nothing linear about this at all. They teamed up with a guitarist named Bill Wadhams, I believe, and they added another lead guitarist, Don Kirkpatrick, and they formed Animotion, signed a deal with Mercury Records, and of course they came out with their debut album, and there was Obsession. Obsession. Now I learned this. I just learned this about Obsession. It was written by Holly Knight and a British actor named Michael. I can't pronounce his last name. I was too lazy. I was too lazy to look up how to pronounce his last name. It's Desbarres, two separate words. I believe it's Michael DeBar, something like that. Well, Holly Knight. Oh God, gotta talk to you about Holly Knight. What an amazing woman. Holly Knight was in a group called Spider. Does anybody remember Spider from late 70s, early 80s? Spider had this amazing rocking record in 1980, spring of 1980, called New Romance. Holly Knight was in that group. She might have sang on that. If she sang on that record, and I think she did, she had God, incredible vocals. Kind of like Grace Slick in a way. It was an amazing record. Holly Knight. But she later became a songwriter. She wrote Love is a Battlefield. She co-wrote that, Love is a Battlefield, and Invincible. Both hit records for Pat Benatar. And in 1985, 86, Holly Knight formed a group called Defies. And you might remember, if you're really deep into 80s music, you're going to have to be deep into 80s music to remember this. Holly Knight had a minor hit in the summer of 86 called Hanging on a Heart Attack. Her band Defiance had a minor hit with that record. Well, she co-wrote this record, she co-wrote Obsession. I had to mention that. Well, later on in the 80s, some personnel changes came into being for Animotion. Astrid Plain, she was the original lead singer, female lead vocalist of Animotion. She was replaced by a woman named Cynthia Rhodes. Now, I just learned that Cynthia Rhodes, now I knew she was married to Richard Marx. She was involved with Richard Marx. She was in one of his videos, as a matter of fact. Don't mean nothing. But I also learned that Cynthia Rhodes, she was also in Toto's video, Rosanna. She danced in that video, I believe. But Cynthia Rhodes, she played the role of Penny Thomas in Dirty Dancing back in 1987. And boy, she made a big sacrifice. Cynthia Rhodes, well, after she married Richard Marx in 1989, and she gave up her career. She raised three boys, three children. And Richard Marx, I just read that Richard Marx and Cynthia Rhodes, I guess they separated or divorced or parted ways just a few years ago after about 25 years of marriage. Still, Cynthia Rhodes on lead vocals of this record. She shares vocals with another fellow, Paul Egman, I believe is how you pronounce his name, Engemann, a new member who was brought into Animotion. And they had this one record. Well, they had that Room to Move, which is kind of a lost 45 now. Went to number 9 on Billboard's Hot 100, but you don't hear this song very often anymore, except maybe on the 80s Countdown on XM Radio, and that's about it. But it was definitely an MTV hit and a VH1 hit too. And it's at number 22 on my fantasy playlist, March 18th, 1989.